Violence against women and children is still a very real issue in South Africa. That is why it is the focus of the 2025 South African Child Gauge. The report looks at how these forms of violence are interlinked and how we can build safer and healthier families and communities. Stay tuned because we are about to speak to one of the contributors who will help us understand this issue and share what we can do to make a change.
The South African Child Gauge is the flagship research publication of the Children's Institute, and the 2025 issue brought together over 70 researchers, policymakers, and practitioners as chapter authors and case study authors. This 18th edition of the Child Gauge focused on the intersection of violence against women and children. Now, to help us understand this very intricate topic a bit better, we are joined by one of the authors. So, hi there, Patrick. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Emily. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. So, Patrick, can you introduce yourself and share what you wrote about in the Child Gauge?
Sure. So I'm Patrick Burton. I have previously been the director of the Center for Justice and Crime Prevention, where we focused for about 15 years on violence against children and violence in schools, particularly in South Africa. My work is really cutting across all forms of child rights, and I do a lot of work around children's rights online and child safety online.
Now, Patrick, what are the most important things children should know about how schools can help prevent violence?
Well, I think the first thing is that school should be a place of peace, should be a place where there is no hitting, no shouting, and a place that shares and inculcates messages of non-violence. It means that, schools should completely stop using things like corporal punishment. It means that teachers are role models. Teachers are there to support you as well as to teach and to share knowledge and to help you learn. They're there to help you learn emotional superpowers, things like empathy, how to manage your emotions, how to resolve conflicts, and also places where you learn about healthy relationships, communications, and respect. And that, I think, is underpins so much of what is so important when we talk about violence in schools, are these notions of healthy relationships and respect. I think it's also probably important to say as well that schools should play a fundamental role in promoting fairness and challenging unfair rules, and to promote things like gender equitable norms and how to relate, to teach boys to adopt what we call healthier, positive masculinities. And then finally, that schools are there to help you and schools are there to support you when you need help. And I think that's a critical factor. And that doesn't just apply to learning. When you're battling with something in schools, when you're battling with something in the classroom and battling to learn something, but it's also about how can schools help you and support you when you're battling with things in your own life, whether that is violence, whether that's abuse, whether that's just how to relate to somebody. It's important that schools are there to support you in that as well.
Now, Patrick, your chapter talks about schools creating safe and caring spaces. Now, why is it so important that everyone at school is treated with respect?
Well, I think it's important because, so much of what we've learned over the years is that violence is both a learned behavior. It is something that often results from what you see in your home and what you see in schools and what you see around you. And respect, and learning to respect and to relate to people healthily serves to interrupt what we call that cycle of violence. And so, we know that children, spend so much of their time at school, probably even more time than a lot of children spend at home. And so it's the most important place and the place that provides the most opportunity for children to learn how to respect each other. It makes sure that school becomes the best places to learn. And with that respect, you also learn to support each other. So I think, schools really are critical in making this sense of respect and how you behave and live respect on a daily basis. So important.
So, how can teachers use positive discipline and good classroom management to guide learners without hurting or shouting at them?
Yeah, so this is very important. And when we talk about positive discipline, what it essentially means is that it's a form of discipline that doesn't involve hitting or smacking or punishing. It's a more positive way of engaging with children to teach them when their behaviors are inappropriate, and how to behave in a more positive way.
Mm.
Now, just to note, physical punishment has been banned in schools for almost 20 years, which means that by now, teachers and schools should be well versed in using positive discipline, but we know that's not the case. Okay, so how? The first is to use very clear rules as to what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And they should be consistent. They should be non-violent behavior management strategies, and making sure that everyone knows what the expectation is of their behavior, of children's behavior in the classroom and in the school. The other thing, I think, when it comes to positive discipline, is that it focuses on problem solving instead of punishing. So teachers help you solve your problems and solve, why you might be behaving in a particular way that otherwise would warrant being punished in a positive way, and in a way that encourages also, again, respect and engagement and positivity. Often when we see corporal punishment or physical punishment being used, not only does it teach children that violence can be used as an answer, as a solution to something, to stop something that you don't like, but also it undermines children's ability or doesn't build their ability or capacity to deal with problems in a problem-solving way that results in a positive outcome for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Now, what can learners be taught about healthy relationships, solving problems peacefully, and challenging harmful ideas like boys needing to be tough or violent?
Now, that is a really, really, really important question. So, one of the things that we know, and one of the things that I discussed in the chapter, is this relationship between violence against children and violence against children in schools, and violence against women, and gender-based violence. And we know that a lot of that is rooted in the messages that children learn when they are young people, when they are children, about unequal relationships, about who's in charge, who should be in charge, about what we call traditional gender roles. And again, because children spend so much time at school, school is one of the most important places where children can be taught about equal, healthy relationships. Understanding, again, what respect is, what empathy is, understanding things, what we call social emotional learning, which is how to manage your own feelings. All of those play a critical role in teaching children what the fundamental, what we call life skills are, how to manage your life in a non-violent way. And I think schools are really so important in challenging the gender inequality and the messages that we send, and particularly to boys. And it's those kind of what we call toxic messages, where girls are seen as being inferior, or seen as being different, or not deserving a particular place and role. It's those kind of toxic messages that often lead to the violence, particularly gender-based violence, that we see both in schools and through adulthood.
Yes. Now, Patrick, what can schools do to support learners who need help, including those struggling at home or online? And how can children safely ask for help when they need it?
Yeah, critical factor, So one of the things that we focus very much on is making sure that there's what we call a reporting mechanism or a safe mechanism in schools for children to report violence when they're experiencing it, when they're battling with anything, and to do it in a way that ensures that there's some feedback, there's some action taken on their report. The problem is a lot of learners don't feel safe reporting. And this is where schools have such an important role to play in creating a climate and an environment where children feel safe to report. So they need to feel that if they tell a teacher, if they tell the principal, if they tell some other member of staff that they're experiencing violence, that they're being bullied, that they're being abused, that their photos are being shared online, that they feel safe to do that and that something will be done to respond. Because if the school doesn't act on a report, then why should children bother reporting? So I
Yeah.
think it's very important that they feel safe to report and that action can be seen to be taken as well to make sure that, reporting is encouraged. That's the one thing. The other thing is that you asked also about, how can schools help when children are battling at home or battling online.
Mm.
Schools are again well placed, and teachers should have the capacity and often do have the ability to identify when children are battling. Maybe their school grades are dropping. Maybe they're becoming isolated. Maybe, so a child's being bullied, it impacts their social way they interact with others. They want to withdraw into themselves. And teachers are in an ideal position to see when that is happening, to identify those signs, and to go to the child and speak to them and try and understand what is happening. Why is this happening? If a child's really had good grades in the past and those grades suddenly fall, why is that happening? And so teachers should have the skills and should be able to assist learners when they're battling. And the same goes with online. And I think one important thing comment I want to make about when children are battling, in the digital environment on their devices, when they're being cyberbullied, or maybe when pictures have been shared or taken of them that they don't want. A lot of adults, I think, tend to dismiss this as it's not as harmful as when it's happening to you in the physical environment. But we know that's not true. We know that when children are experiencing violence online in the digital space, that it can be just as harmful as any other form of violence that a child experiences. And so I think it's important that schools recognize that, and then they support children in getting the sort of assistance, the counseling that they need.
Mm. Now, Patrick, just to end off, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I think these questions have been really great and probing and very useful. So I think you've captured most of it. I think in summary, just to say that, we know that children in South Africa experience violence in schools on a daily basis. We know that's happening. We know that a lot of it goes unseen. And I think it's really important that children speak about that violence. They do it in a way that, that encourages others to seek help. And I think it's really important that schools respond in the appropriate way and that adults respond in the appropriate way. Schools can be the most important vehicle or place that can interrupt cycles of violence that feed into violence later on. And I think it's really important that we know that and that we act on that.
Yes. Well, thank you, Patrick, so much for joining me today. That was very informative.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.